Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm a white guy who grew up in Orange County, California.
And I'm Jerome, a black guy who grew up in Orange County but moved to Northern California. And we were high school teammates.
30 years later, Jerome and I have reconnected, and while we still consider ourselves friends, our viewpoints differ on a lot of different topics.
But what we don't differ on is that people can still get along and have civil conversations.
Even about serious and emotional topics.
Since I grew up in a white neighborhood, most of my friends were white or other races.
So I said to Jerome, hey, let's do a show about things white people say and prove to people that you can have a civil, engaging, and oftentimes educational discussion.
And most importantly, we both agree that racism isn't political. So we promised each other we would keep politics out of the show.
That's part of our plan to show everyone that these conversations can be positive.
So send us your topics.
And we'll do our best to discuss the things that you hear white guys say. Look out, folks. Things white guys say. Jerome and I just learned how to use a virtual background. And you can see I got one. Jerome's going to get himself a little green sheet for the backdrop so he can use it too. But we're going to have some fun with it. We're trying to act professional. So, hey, Jerome, we usually go with the flashback. So today's flashback, I ran into an old buddy of both of ours last night, African-American dude and married to a white girl that we grew up with, both of them. Chris Johnson from Brea. You remember him? And he married Lynn Polnazik, who you grew up with. And she was telling me, I went to elementary school at Jerome. So you remember them?
I do remember them. The whole Amy Polnazik, the whole Polnazik family.
Yeah, for sure. They're great. And a shout out to both of them for, first of all, to Amy for listening to the show because Chris hadn't yet. And she goes, I kept telling you, you got to listen to the show. You know, Josh and Jerome. So in any case, I ran into them last night. I thought I'd give them a shout out.
Nice.
And we'd start with that. But hey, we got a really cool topic today because it's current in more ways than one. And I'm just going to read to you from the LA Times, Jerome. And we're taping this show December 2020. The election's over. The inauguration hasn't come yet, but race is still a very hot media topic. And I texted Jerome in November. I'm like, dude, I can't believe what I just read online. I read that a school district in Los Angeles County is talking about burning books. And I just had this image of Footloose, 1982, the movie where the whole town in Utah is standing around throwing library books going, this can't really be happening. And so Jerome texted me yesterday and said, dude, they actually approved. Let me just read this to you, and Jerome, and then I want to get your thoughts on it's book burning in 2020. During a virtual meeting on September 9th, this is from the Los Angeles Times, middle and high school English teachers in the Burbank Unified School District received a bit of surprising news. Until further notice, they will not be allowed to teach some of the books on their curriculum. 5 novels have been challenged in Burbank: Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, Theodore Taylor's The K, and Mildred D. Taylor's Newbery medal-winning young adult classic, The Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. And honestly, that's the one of those I'm not familiar with. But anyway, Jerome, tell me about book burning, man. What do you think?
So as an educator, first off, let's say this is definitely not a political argument because we've seen this call for book burning from both the extreme right, the extreme left, in that whether it's those things that personally affect us that we don't want to have to deal with are those things that are challenged. So whether it was Uncle Tom's Cabin that the South banned because it portrayed slavery in a light that they didn't think was a correct light, or we're talking about, like you said, 1980s and over-sexualized content that people don't think kids should hear. Personally, as an educator myself, I don't and never have really prescribed to that idea of banning books because of the content that's inside of them, especially if it's content that is historically relevant to a specific time.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it either, because I think you and I agree on that, on this topic that, we've talked about this a lot, and it's easy for me as a Caucasian to say this, but this is educational about the history and helps me understand why I was moved to team up with Jerome and to do this, because had I not read Huck Finn, had I not read To Kill a Mockingbird, I probably wouldn't have understood the impact of the inequality that existed. And I think what I learned from it is, man, you love to say, oh, we've come so far, but then you step back and go, well, have we come that far?
Hmm.
And it's interesting to me. The article says the challenges came from 4 parents, 3 of them Black, for alleged potential harm to public school districts, roughly 400 Black students. And again, it's hard for a Caucasian to kind of step in and say, hey, this should or shouldn't happen, because I'm not one of those 400 students. But at the same time, man, as you said, this just seems to be a broken record that comes back every few years. Yeah.
It's multifaceted too when you think about it, because I think typically it's been liberals criticizing conservatives for their wanting to ban things, ban books for whatever reasons it is. But now that it's liberals doing it, you don't see the same backlash from other liberals about banning information. Now, I think the problem's a lot deeper than this. I think that I have no problem in my classroom using books that cite the N-word, using books that um, uh, deal with controversial issues, because I'm very comfortable talking about those issues. And I'm very comfortable navigating kids through that. So we can discuss and read 12 Years a Slave, because I can teach them along the way. There are teachers who are simply not comfortable navigating the use of the N-word.
Sure.
So
Which is understandable.
yeah, so I can understand in that situation a parent being hesitant to their child being in a room where the adult is not educated in having that conversation. So to me, that's a bigger issue of our teachers and our educators being well trained in the areas of diversity, the areas of cultural awareness.
So, Jerome, there's got to be a teacher's supplement to addressing race in To Kill a Mockingbird, or a teacher's supplement to addressing race in Huck Finn, is there not?
There is, but I'm telling you,
No, I understand it doesn't ease the the
yeah,
challenge of teaching it.
I'll give you an example. At our school, we were doing a racial summit, and it was scheduled to go into effect the next year. And as we got closer, several members of our faculty said, I'm not comfortable leading a racial summit. I just don't feel like I'm trained enough. I don't feel that's what we're doing right now.
Sure.
We're trying to get people to begin talking about these things, having these conversations, so they are comfortable picking up a novel like Huck Finn and being able to articulate to their high school kids. Again, we're not talking about having this book read in first grade or second grade.
No.
We're talking about young adults able to navigate this tough conversation about what our country used to be, and in some ways still is, but navigating it so that they can learn and grow from these things.
So, in your opinion, should these books be read in a history class or a English literature class?
They could be read in either class depending on the lesson plan and the curriculum the teacher's trying to get across. So like me, I use Uncle Tom's Cabin in my African American experience class.
Mm-hmm.
And I would use a book like Huck Finn might be more appropriate in an English class. So I think they all fit into different areas.
So I think what I'm hearing from you on this, Drum, is if you're the principal of a high school, because yeah, I mean, middle school, I think, it'd be a little tougher and a longer discussion, I think, but this is talking about middle and high school.
Yeah.
And I do think I read several of these books before I got to high school. But if you were the principal of a new high school, or even, combo middle school, high school, how would you design your curriculum? It sounds to me like you would include some of these books. You're certainly not saying you would ban any of them.
No.
Okay. So what would be your steps in saying we are going to include these books in our curriculum, but here are the 1 or 2 things that we will also do, whether it's requiring teacher training or sensitivity training, whatever it might be?
I think it goes to what you just said, teacher training, educating the teachers enough to be in a place where they should be able to have discussions on race. They should be able to navigate the difference between historical events and current events, and be able to allow kids, and in this instance, I think a letter should go home to the parents before reading the book, saying, this is what we're going to be doing in class. Please have a conversation with your child about the role of this book, what it was, where it was, the time frame, and why we're reading it. And here's
Yeah.
why we're reading it.
Yeah, the why we're reading it, I think, is important. You could also refer them to like a YouTube video that was either done by
Yeah.
the school or just something like you, maybe one of the videos you're doing. And folks, if you haven't had a chance to check out Jerome's new YouTube channel, it's called Time Out for Black History, Jerome Facion Sr. Check it out on YouTube. I think you got 4 videos out now, right? And I got to be honest, I might have learned about some of these things in high school. Some of them I'm like, man, I never heard of this before. So
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot. It's cool. And it's deep. It's really deep if you want it to be. So cool. Good job on doing that. So
thank you.
Jerome, you referenced offline before we started talking today that the book burning discussion is kind of similar to the more recent, more prevalent discussion of statues. So can you kind of share why you made that connection?
So I've seen a lot of people making that correlation, saying, especially about this specific instance, because this is a case of liberals, mostly, African Americans, saying we don't want to have to deal with past racial stuff in this situation. The same way you see people beginning to take down statues. Now, to me, these are 2 different things, because to me, the books are pieces of literature that don't praise or condone anything. It's literature. It's a book.
Sure.
Your job is to read it, analyze it, learn from it. These statues were instances of people being glorified and being put up at a town hall or a school named after them, things like that. So those are, it's part of the same debate about understanding history. But, I talked about this in the last episode, that statue does belong. It belongs in a museum, a historical museum. That book belongs as a piece of history that we're able to learn from and understand, but not glorified, as, the greatest, actual truths. You understand what I'm saying?
So it's context is really what I hear you saying in both places. Like there's a time and a place, and the way African Americans have interpreted, at least many of the statue, is it's a statue. It's to glorify somebody. That's why Michael Jordan's got a statue outside Chicago Stadium. That's why you have the Lincoln Memorial. So I think context is really what we're talking about, and it's almost as if we could have that same discussion about statues. Like it's okay to have it here as long as you do A, B, and C with whether it's a museum or this is the site where this took place. So the reason we're having this here is to memorialize that, not to celebrate it so much, but to memorialize it. Here's the background and the context you need to understand that goes along with it. So I'm totally blown away by the fact that book burning, I mean, it's almost like you think of the movie Footloose in 1982, and they're almost making fun that it used to happen. You know what I mean? Like we're still doing this in 1982.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that they're not banning the books. What was the language they used?
They've been challenged. So let's see.
They're pausing.
Okay.
They're pausing the use of these books because, like you said, banning a book it doesn't sound right, and so they're using the word pausing while we gather more information about what our next step should be.
And it says that all but Huck Finn have been required. Keep going. I mean, interrupt.
Yeah. And so that idea that they're going to, the hope would be that they're going to go into teacher training. They're going to make sure that every teacher who's going to be teaching Huck Finn has a plan for how they're going to navigate the use of the N-word and the relationships between Huck and Jim, and so that people do have that understanding.
Your co-host Josh Luke here, and if you like what you're hearing, then check out our not-for-profit website at timeforredemption.org. Timeforredemption.org was created so Caucasians and other races have a platform to lean into for the social justice movement. It's not political, guys. It's not even controversial. It's just human. It's a movement that provides resources, tools, whatever you might need for individuals, corporations, and communities that may not be comfortable with existing social justice organizations. So if this sounds good to you guys, check out redemption.org and just join in and do your part to end systematic and institutionalized racism. Hey, I did it, folks. You can too. Interestingly enough, as I look at this LA Times article, Jerome, I'm going to put you on the spot here because there's a term I haven't heard, which may be for a whole nother show.
Uh-oh.
It says, while book banning has a long history in America, the situation in Burbank dash, once a sundown town that practiced racial segregation,
Oh
is
yeah.
freshly complicated. Is that a term you're familiar with, a
Wow.
sundown town?
Yeah, I was driving through. I was in Texas in 1990. What was it? 92, 93.
Okay. When you're in
Vidor,
college, then.
Texas.
Yeah.
And there was a sign and it said, "Don't let the sun come down on you in Vidor." And the
Huh.
connotation was,
Yeah.
if you're black, don't be in here when the sun goes down because it won't end well. And
Wow.
so that's what, to me, that's what that always implied. A sundown town was that you're not safe here once that happens.
That's a city sign. That was actually a city sign, or
It
is it?
wasn't a city sign, it
That's
was a sign that
graffiti.
was up in the
Yeah,
city.
it was the guy that thought he was the mayor, even though he wasn't elected in a democratic process. So
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this stuff does it, and it's so closely aligned with history and events that have taken place before. And understanding those events allows us to better understand why the current situation looks the way it does.
yeah, and it's just it's interesting. I'm really glad you drew the parallel between book burning, banning, pausing, whatever it is, because it sounds like maybe they are trying to do the right thing to say, hey, we just got to put these in the right context. Because I certainly could look at the 3 or 4 of those books that I read growing up and saying they did have an impact. I certainly learned from them. I have a better understanding of American history as a result of them. So yeah, it's interesting to read that all this is going on. They're mentioning that David Starr Jordan Middle School, there was an incident recently. So there is still the racial tension that's coming about as a result of them. So I think book burning is probably more of a media a media headline to get attention to it, but as you pointed out, it's more of a pause. So
And
um, go ahead.
real quick, that all of this stuff stems from our uncomfortableness with the issue of race.
And discussing it, right? Just
Yeah,
talking
it,
about it,
it
right?
really, all of it evolves from that. It evolves from the fact that we can't sit down in a room and have a discussion where kids and adults can feel comfortable about what's about to happen. People are terrified of offending, people are terrified of being offended, and so we've got to get to a place where these conversations become the norm, where these conversations are embraced, where these conversations are, seeked out, as opposed to the guy running and hiding because he's terrified of the conversation.
Yeah. So I agree with you on that. And I think that's part of what you and I are trying to accomplish, is to show people that that conversation can take place. I do find it interesting that I think 3 or 4 of the people a handful of people that reach out to me regularly about the show and how encouraged they are in an interracial marriage. And again, it's because they've been talking about this since they got married. This is comfortable for them,
Yeah.
And I think that what they're saying is, I appreciate that you guys are trying to make it more comfortable for others as well. So, and I think we will come back to the statue issue on a different show. We've talked about that on our long list of show topics, maybe digging a little deeper on that, because that is a more modern topic. But Jerome, what would you like to see from, we like to close with an action item. We're coming up on 20 minutes here and we try to stay somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes on our shows. But what would you like to see from the layperson, maybe the parent of the child that's in middle school or high school? How would you like them to engage in this conversation if it takes place at their school?
To me, it's always about, I'll keep going back to this, the education aspect of it. We have children. Our job as parents is to get our children prepared for the world. And one of the ways I think that we fail to do that is in educating our children about race and educating our children to be in a place where they're comfortable. And part of that failure comes from our own inability to feel comfortable about race and to be able to have that same conversation. So to be able to say to your child, you guys read a book in class today. Oh, that book. Oh, tell me about it. How did you feel when they said that word? Whether your child's white or black, what was the feeling? So to me, it's just about that educating piece of it, having those tough conversations that are uncomfortable, but you need to have them.
Yeah, it's context. We keep coming back to context. Hey, let me take this a step further because this keeps popping into my mind. My kids a few months ago, I looked up and they were watching the movie Harriet and they loved it. They thought it was great. And I think I understood them to be sensitive to the fact that there was inequality,
Mhm.
appreciative that it was educational for them. But if that were a book, would we be having the same discussion? Or I guess the question is, how do you feel when a movie like Harriet, because it feels to, if I felt like to me like they were celebrating Harriet, and she certainly should have been celebrated, right? So I don't know. Talk to me about that.
I always have a hard time with the movies because the movies are very rarely historically accurate.
Yeah.
They take, and if you always see it always says based on somebody's
Yeah.
life, so they add in all the
There's
little
one
things.
thing true. They
Yeah,
wore that
and they
same color shirt one day. That's about it.
and that's true, and I get it. Hollywood's trying to sell tickets; they're not trying to be historically truthful. So I love that it inspires kids to maybe find excitement or passion for an individual. Your hope is that after they watch Harriet, they go research about her and her actual life. Like in my class, we got done watching Birth of a Nation, which was the movie about Nat Turner's rebellion. And it's the redo. The old Birth of the Nation was the W.D. Griffith. This was done in, I think, 2016 by Nate Parker. And after it was over, I said, all right, tonight you guys go home and I want you to read every bit of information you can find about Nat Turner's rebellion. And we're going to talk about it tomorrow. When they came back the next day, we talked about the 90 ways in which the movie was different from the actual realities. So I do love those movies because I think they inspire passion. But whenever you watch one of those movies, you should research right afterward the similarities and differences about real life events and the events portrayed in those movies, because those movies are meant to be feel-good movies for the most part.
Yeah. So I think, so anyway, folks, I think the message here is context, understanding. And for my kids who are high school and college age, I felt like it was important for them to watch that from the educational perspective. They certainly understand that racism is completely unacceptable. So I didn't have any problem watching it. And I would have been happy to discuss with them, as Jerome pointed out, that most of these are based on a true story. So, hey, Jerome, I thought this was a really good conversation. And I do think it's a conversation that, the name of the show is Things White Guys Say, and book burning is something that's kind of an eye roller for white people. Like, why are we talking about this again? And it sounds like for some African-Americans as well. So I think this was a great conversation to prove once again that these conversations can be had. They can be civil. They cannot be political. I appreciate that you pointed out a couple times that usually these discussions are from the right pushing the left. And now that they're from the left pushing the right, there's a different context. But the point is, we all have opinions and we can talk about it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Share this with a friend. As Jerome said and suggested, if you have the opportunity to get engaged in a discussion about whether movies or books about, race that use the N-word or other things, use the suggestions that Jerome suggested, keep it civil and make sure the proper context is understood. I think that's what we got out of today's show. So thanks again, Jerome.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Things White Guys Say. We encourage you to follow our show on YouTube and podcast networks, like the show, and share this episode with a friend.
And visit our website at thingswhiteguysay.com or drop us a line at info@thingswhiteguysay.com.